Ja, wij zijn heel blij dat wij een aantal buitenlandse gasten hebben. En vandaag is dat als keynote Michael Piechowski. Onder andere bekend van de boeken die je hier ziet. En met als thema persoonlijke groei is er iemand die dat als geen ander kan vertegenwoordigen eigenlijk. Hij heeft 8 jaar lang met Dabrowski gewerkt. Heeft 24 jaar in Polen ook gewoond. En is eigenlijk degene die ervoor heeft gezorgd dat de theorie van de positieve desintegratie, die gaat over persoonlijke ontwikkeling, en de overexcitabilities, dat die naar het Engels vertaald werden, want hij woont inmiddels al vele jaren in de US. Nou, hij gaat vandaag een keynote geven en daarin zal hij ingaan op talent development versus personal growth. En ik hoop dat jullie hem van harte willen verwelkomen terwijl hij hier naar het podium komt. Michael, may I invite you to join us and share with us your experience, your wisdom over many years working on the theory of positive disintegration and personal growth as a theme in your life. And just give you the podium so that you can do it. So here you have it. Everything okay?
Thank you very much, Desiree and Nora. Thank you for having me. I wanted to say good morning to you. And I feel very handicapped because I cannot tie to what Desiree and Nora were talking about because I don't know Dutch. So, the talk here really is about the basic issues in education. Children go to school to learn to be prepared to make a living, work in the society, and so that everything works. But the other orientation that has a long history at least in Europe, is a child orientation. What does it mean to be child-centered? Well, when you think about that, it's not only to find out how the child learns, whether it has difficulties or not, and what kind of difficulties, but the whole individuality of the child. And individuality means that there's individual development, and there are no two developments that are the same. Each development is unique. So this is a more demanding approach to education, to be child-centered. And as I hear, things are not as bad in Holland as they are in America, where there's an emphasis and pressure to turn gifted education oriented primarily to achievement. And so talent development is then defined as striving for eminence. And I have to quote here something which is very peculiar. That gifted children need to become eminent producers to be labeled as gifted adults. This is a very odd statement because that means that if you are not producing, you are not gifted. That means a cow that doesn't make milk is not a cow. A chicken that doesn't lay eggs is not a chicken. A bee that doesn't make honey is not a bee. This logic defies comprehension. But there's another thing which is pretty, I would say, pernicious in that, because it means that if you're not producing, you're not worth anything, okay? It is demeaning. Without notable achievement, the person is of little worth. Well, I think that we have arrived at a stage, and we have been there for a long time, saying that every human being is of equal worth, right? Because otherwise we wouldn't have human rights. We have won the human rights at the United Nations not so long ago, after World War II. So stress on achievement puts out of consideration the emotional development of the person. And we have yet to really start paying attention to emotional development of children and everyone else. Jean Peterson said it very well, that age, peers, educators, and significant adults do not have a window for viewing the inner world of gifted kids. So why should we take into account the inner life of gifted youth? Well, for two simple reasons. One, that the lives of gifted young people are not free of difficulties, turmoil, and stressful events. And then the second thing is that they should not be left alone to bear the burden of the life difficulties, because there are deaths in families, there are serious illnesses, chronic illnesses, financial reverses, there's loss of friends, hostilities, turmoil in the country, and so on. And also for gifted children and young people, there is a big question of coming to terms with one's ability. Is it a blessing or is it a curse? And this is something you must have heard before. So if the focus on developing talent is one-sided, it can lead to loss of a proper sense of self. As one child said, "I have done everything my parents and coaches have asked me to do, expected me to do: straight A's, success in extracurriculars, well-behaved, but I don't know who I am." Therefore, oh my gosh, if I put this down, it will fall. This student described the consequences of following the path of being compliant, agreeing with the expectations of others, and that brings approval from adults, and the approval feels good. But if the self is ignored, that in the end, over time, creates a vacuum. So the missing part here is consideration for the emotional growth of the person. And adolescence is a particularly intense period of development, and only because these people are so young they can do it. Development of identity, choice of a career, finding a partner, meeting the expectation of others, or defying the expectations of others. So to summarize, the two perspectives, one of talent development as the product perspective, emphasis on achievement, outer recognition. The risk is dissociation of talent from the self, and it also fosters competitiveness. Now, there are always people who are born to be competitive, but we know by now that often competitions are unfair, and we have had examples of that over the years. Now, in the personal growth perspective, the child-centered perspective, development of talent is an organic part of personal growth. And the child's self is endowed with will and capacity for self-determination. So that's one thing that I recognize that Desiree was pointing out to, self-determination. But it also fosters interrelatedness, which is very important for us in the world today. So I find it heartwarming to learn that in the Netherlands, the model of talent development is based on personal growth, which is well represented by, I'm sure that's what Desiree was talking about. And as well, in the recent definition of adult giftedness arrived at by Dutch researchers Maud van Thiel, Knox Nauta, and Jan Dirksen. A gifted person is a quick and clever thinker, able to deal with complex matters. This person is autonomous, curious, and passionate. A sensitive and emotionally rich individual with great imagery, living intensely. He or she enjoys being creative. So the emphasis here is on the inner experience of giftedness. In the emphasis on achievement, the inner experience is ignored, denied, or not taken into account. And I'm proud to say, as being the associate editor of Advanced Development, which comes out of the Gifted Development Center in Denver. You had Linda Silverman here, so you know what I'm talking about. This paper by these three wonderful Dutch authors is in the next issue in volume 17. And I'm very pleased to tell you that. So we have the dilemma how to nurture talents where the self is sacrificed, or to reach the highest level of achievement with support that's supported by personal growth, because the personal growth is really the foundation. And if we can learn important lessons from a study that Jean Peterson did with achievers and underachievers. She conducted hundreds of group sessions with gifted students. In the school, some of the underachievers were recognized for their ability, but they were also always told, you're wasting your potential. But other high ability students went unrecognized, and there were people, of course, that always happens everywhere, that doubted that they were even gifted. So in the discussion group, they quickly bonded together, talked very openly, readily, they laughed easily, and they shared their serious concerns comfortably. And here's the important thing. They said they were used to adults not listening to them. So they were not afraid to speak candidly and with feeling. They respected each other's opinions. They were spontaneous and expressed themselves with good humor. But they were free of the pressure to compete for high achievement. So it was like they chose to be underachievers. They were more at ease with themselves, farther along in development of their identity, because they had to struggle to define themselves in opposition to significant adults. So what Jean Peterson did, she brought together a group of underachievers and a group of high achievers together. The achievers were highly competitive and argumentative. They dominated the quiet students. They lacked spontaneity. They lacked humor. They were always serious, intent of work, study, and so on. And for the most part, they have not explored the issues of their own identity or relationship with their peers. So they lacked the self-knowledge that the underachievers already had. So this is the brief comparison. The underachievers opted out of the race. As I said, they weren't used to being listened to by adults. They were not afraid to speak candidly and so on. And I already told you about the achievers. So when they were brought together, very interesting things happened, and there were surprises on both sides. At first, the achievers were quiet because they seemed uncomfortable not being in charge. What is this thing doing here? And they were surprised to find among the underachievers, equally bright, maybe even sometimes brighter than themselves, other students. And they realized, too, that the underachievers had a high level of self-knowledge that there was lacking in them, the achievers. Now, the surprise for the underachievers was to discover that the achievers suffered stress, self-doubt, anger even, depression, and fear of failure. All right? So, I'm going to skip the next slide because I want to go on to the issue of self-knowledge. So how is a young person to gain self-knowledge? Well, one is by choosing the right parents. Another way is by reading Eleanor Roosevelt's You Learn by Living. It's a wonderful book, and I met someone recently who just read it and said there are so many good things in it. It's worth reading today. And I will talk about it in my session tomorrow afternoon. Well, if they attend the Waldorf types of school, they will gain in self-knowledge. They could become a Buddhist that will lead them to self-knowledge. Or sometimes if you are a rebel, that helps developing some self-awareness. Or by attending discussion groups based on the Essential Guide to Talking with Gifted Teens that Gene Peterson developed. And there are other approaches like that through SANG, which is the Serving Emotional Needs of the Gifted. Or by attending UNASA. Now, UNASA is a camp for highly gifted kids, 10 to 14, that we have been doing now for 16 years. And we had it 24 times because it's now twice every summer, once in Colorado, once in Michigan. So these are all the opportunities for a young person to get help in developing self-knowledge. Or by finding a Dutch gifted coach. So here I'll tell you about UNASA, because this leads to the issue of personal growth. UNASA means balance in the Lakota Sioux language. And the camp experience is designed to attend to the 5 aspects of the self: the physical, emotional, social, intellectual, and spiritual. And one boy at the age of 14 wrote us after the camp what it meant to him. The idea of UNASA is simple. Get a bunch of gifted kids together and let them help each other grow. But it is so much more. I don't think any of us ever realized that we need to develop more than our intellect. We need to develop 5 different parts of ourselves. Maybe some of us thought that we shouldn't be so smart in one way and so lacking in other ways, but no one realized that we need help. We need to help our other aspects, like the social, emotional, or spiritual. We need them to help grow. UNASA showed us all that we need to do and could bring ourselves into balance. And that is literally what UNASA means in Lakota, balance. Nowhere else is that stressed or even noticed, he said. Balance is the heart of UNASA. So the personal growth component of Yunasa, which we have a session every day, is the introduction to psychosynthesis. Anyone heard of psychosynthesis? It's an Italian invention. It's a set of techniques developed by Assagioli and then Ferrucci for psychological and spiritual growth. It's very practical, very easy to use. And the principal ideas of psychosynthesis can be summarized in this way, in a very simplifying way, that our everyday focus, our consciousness is focused on everything that is in our awareness and around. But outside of that is a much bigger field of the unconscious with its lower, middle, and higher divisions. And the higher self is the transpersonal self that exists in higher consciousness. So the work of psychosynthesis is to develop a pathway so that energy, inspiration, creative energy can flow from the higher self into our regular, everyday self. And the practice of psychosynthesis with the exercises attends to elements of personal growth, and I'll just describe them to you. First, divided into agents and components and means, just to organize it somewhat. So the agents, well, first we have to be aware that at every point we have choices. So awareness of our choices and their consequences. For instance, someone likes smoking cigarettes, and then it decides at a certain point, well, to smoke or not to smoke, which is better? Each has a consequence to be weighed either as benefit or a burden. Because on one hand, it's a health risk. It's not good for your health, but it brings a welcome relief when one is agitated. So if you make the choice for health, then you have to find other ways of calming your mind, like psychosynthesis. So when we are faced with a choice, then we use our will to follow the choice that we make. The will is the executive faculty of the self. And here, Assagioli makes a very important contribution to understanding the foundational faculty of ourself, the will. It is not the will where we force ourselves to do things. We become aware what we choose to do. And then it follows without resistance, without obstruction. So when the will becomes deliberate, as I will give you examples in a few minutes, things follow easily. Attention is how we allocate our psychic energy. Concentration is the skill of focusing psychic energy. There are exercises for that in psychosynthesis. The components of the personal growth is that we have many different parts of ourselves, which are called subpersonalities, which are attitudes and motives expressed in sets of behaviors and emotions, and they are cohesive. For instance, here we have the inclination to kleptomania, so we go around and pilfer things and collect them and so on. That would be a sub-personality that acts on certain occasions in that way, okay? And so there is exercise for that in psychosynthesis to sort of bring it into awareness, get some kind of an image of that sub-personality, develop a dialogue with it, and then it can transform and you can be free of that compulsion. Another aspect of it is the inner authority, finding the wise part of the self, the inner compass that points in the direction aligned with one's true self, which would be the higher self. And what are the means in fostering personal growth? Well, we have to start with accepting ourselves, be open to our emotions and feelings, and able to express them. The other mean is that we use self-evaluation, where we recognize our inner strengths and qualities when we set goals and assess how well we have found them. The recognition of inner strength, well, there are gifted children, when they are asked to write down the good qualities in themselves, something beautiful in themselves, they are unable to come up with one thing. These are very sad, unfortunate cases, but they do exist. And that's when personal growth is to help them begin to recognize positive aspects in themselves. So centering is the guided imagery which leads to relaxation and to restoration, silence and solitude. And self-identification is the practice of realizing that I'm more than recognizing I have a body, but I'm more than my body, recognizing that I have feelings, but I'm more than my feelings. I have desires, which compels us in many different directions, but I am more than my desires, and I have thoughts, lots of thoughts, but I am more than my thoughts. And when we can get past all that, which is, I would say, a very advanced kind of practice, then we can identify with the transpersonal self, the one that observes all these things. Another aspect of will that I wanted to talk about and mention is a resistance to compulsion. Resistance to things imposed from the outside, things imposed by others on us. Some of us have very strong resistance to that, some of us have less. And going through school, we kind of adapt and lose the resistance to compulsion. But I tell you, it's throughout the living world. Cockroaches have it, okay? But what is also important to recognize, that gifted students show resistance to compulsion on many occasions when they are treated unfairly, when they are treated without respect, when there is disregard for their intelligence, which in America happens a lot, then the consequence is that they resist and refuse to cooperate. We also have to, because we live in an increasingly diverse world, that students of minority or different race often resist learning as not relevant to them or as prejudiced against them. And so then refusal to learn on their part is a stance against the dominant culture. On the simple everyday level, it is hard to learn something that we see as pointless or that does not interest us. In this case, we can use our will to lower the resistance, to lower the barrier. And a classic example of that is that so many people don't like statistics, but if you go for a master's degree or a PhD, you have to learn statistics. And for many people, the dislike creates a real block in learning this stuff, which is really nothing special. You just have to take it slow. That's all that's to it. And the will can help with it. The deliberate use of your will says, okay, I'm going to put up with it and go on. So now I wanted to give you a few examples of will training to show how down to earth psychosynthesis is. What is that? Oh, we have already done that. Oh, I forgot to push the button. Sorry. Not very experienced with these things. So with will training, do something you have never done before. Well, I'm here. I've never done this before. Make a plan and then follow it. It's a very good exercise. Breaking a habit. Do something extremely slowly. Well, what do the kids at UNASA do? Choose to do, some of them readily choose to eat more slowly. Such a simple thing, but helpful and healthful, good for your health. This next one is good for the gifted kids too. Refrain from saying something you are tempted to say. That's a very good exercise for them. Say no when it's right to say no, but easier to say yes. Well, one of my students had a friend who was always borrowing money from her. And when she was taking the course at psychosynthesis with me, she decided that she's going to say no to her friend because it wasn't good for either of them. And she felt very good that she used her will to say no because it was easier to say to the friend yes, but she chose the harder thing. And here is one for people who tend to be impulsive. Postpone an action you would prefer to begin right now. And for procrastinators, begin at once an action you would prefer to postpone. Is that there? Yes. So here I'll read to you 2 examples of reports on developing will. I did breaking habit for my will exercises. Since that day, I have not picked up a cigarette. Every time I feel like I want one, all I have to do is talk myself out of it by thinking about how I have control over my life, and there is no reason why I must smoke if I really don't want to. I feel so much healthier and happier now that I have quit smoking. The will exercises have also helped me take control over my life in other ways. And here's another example. I never could have guessed the power of the will exercises. Unbelievable happiness has fallen on me as a result of them. I was able to spend time with myself instead of filling every moment with responsibilities. I was able to say no to people and know why. And through my understanding, they also understood. And procrastination became manageable, and the work simply happened. Now here's there are exercises for concentration, which is visualization, which is not really by seeing, it's a visualization, developing each on focusing on each sense. Okay, so first is like visualize a pen writing your name. Another one can be smelling an orange, all in your mind. So this is the result of that exercise. The very first realization I came to in this class was that I have 5 senses. No matter where I am, I have 5 senses. I always have access to sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. Why didn't this occur to me before? It seemed like such a novel idea to try to imagine anything besides something visual. That's why it's called visualization, because you try to see things. So now here I'm being guided on this visualization where I have to try to evoke the scent of my favorite perfume or the feeling of shaking someone's hand. What a concept. I have 5 senses, even in my imagination, because, as you probably know, the people who are good visualizers, there are so good in visualizing that what they visualize, whether it's smelling or seeing or feeling texture and things, or any scene, it's as real, or sometimes to them it's even more real than the reality we are in here. So a good part of psychosynthesis is identifying the positive and negative aspects of our personality and finding how they function in our behavior. Because these are distinct patterns of behavior and which come into activated in specific circumstances, they are called subpersonalities. I already mentioned that. For instance, a person may be careful with money, may be a good saver, but on some occasions acts the opposite by being extravagant. So this person will have two patterns of behavior, like one is thrifty, the other one is extravagant. And then in imagination, when you try allow an image to come out spontaneously, we don't create it, we just allow it to happen to us. And it can be very revealing. So, for instance, for the thrifty one, it could be a piggy bank. If you know what a piggy bank is? Where you put the money to save? Well, it used to be possible to put coins in and they would accumulate, there would be some money. Today, if you put coins in, it doesn't accumulate to anything. You have to do it differently. And the other one, for the extravagant, it could be an image of a rich man whose pockets are stuffed with money. But here, one of my students chose anger as his subpersonality. So the first step, as I mentioned, is to find an image that represents it. And then there's another exercise that when you got a good hold on the subpersonality, the image, you already know how it functions, then you go on a hike up the mountain with your subpersonality. So this is how we described it. Today I looked at anger. Now let's see, that's down here, right? Right. I have always had a fairly short temper, and many times that anger blinded me. When we were walking through the valley and looking at the mountain, all I could see was a desolate wasteland. It reminded me of a place like Death Valley. As we climbed the mountain, I could see that the entire scene was like this. When we got to the top, I asked anger why the world looked like this. He said it is because he can mask the real view. So I asked him to remove the mask, and a beautiful landscape developed. I asked him why he does this, the anger, and he told me that it is really me who does it. He's just a facilitator. So this boy says, I look for the bad in certain situations and let small problem grow until it covers the whole scene and my whole life. I really got a lot out of doing this. It gave me good insight into my emotions. So as you can see, this type of exercise leads to self-discovery and to significant personal growth. So one benefit is insight and change, growthful change. And in very many cases, it's also a relaxation, the relief from stress. And gifted youth, whom you know, who cannot stop their mind from racing, find that these visualizations are effective in slowing their mind, allowing them to relax and fall asleep. They don't have to take sometimes 2 hours before they fall asleep. This facilitates it. And the other one that I mentioned was the finding inner authority, which could be a wise man or a wise woman or any other equivalent of an inner guide. So here in this report, there's an occasional side benefit of the both which is relaxing and invigorating at the same time, my best experience was when I met two wise women on a mountain, and they were my deceased grandmothers, whom I have never met. I was so tired that day, but after the exercise, I had an abundance of energy and felt incredibly good. So, do you need special training to guide young people in the practice of psychosynthesis? No, you don't need a special training. Yeah, I did show you that. There are several of us who lead these exercises in groups, because in one camp we have 4 groups, because there are over 40 kids there. In the other camp we have 5 groups, so there are 5 of us. And all I had to do was to guide them to 1 or 2 of these exercises, and then they have an idea how to conduct it. And the basic concepts and exercises I presented very clearly by Piero Ferrucci in his book, What We May Be. And the subtitle is Techniques for Psychological and Spiritual Growth. And I don't know, Eugene Gendlin, who was Carl Rogers' friend and collaborator, developed a method of focusing, which is quite similar. The thing which is helpful from him is that he gives times for different steps. And by knowing Gendlin's focusing, I was able, in writing the manual for our camp, to put in the pauses. Sometimes 5 seconds is enough, sometimes 15 works, sometimes longer time. And then when we come to the end of the exercise, if this is a scenario, then it may be 1 minute, 2, or even 3 for the experience to develop. And a lot can happen in 1 minute, and even more in 3 minutes. So there are other approaches to fostering personal growth. All we have to do is just implement them, right? And so we are somewhere here. How is your Sitzfleisch?
Maybe my mic is working now. Yesterday you told me that you liked questions from the audience. Is this a good moment for questions, or are there some things that you want to tell us before the questions are coming?
Before the questions, I wanted to guide you to one of these exercises. You have some idea how it works. And I don't promise it will work for every one of you, but I hope it works nicely for you. And it only takes a few minutes. And it's called a spring. A spring, not a spring like this, but a water that flows from a rock, okay? So it's important to know the setting. So all it takes is to assume a relaxed posture with your spine straight. Now, I always explain that for this kind of exercise, the same thing as for meditation, our spine should be like a stack of coins. So there is no tension in keeping it upright, okay? So it's relaxed but straight. So we are both relaxed and alert at the same time. So then I mentioned something about breathing, and then I'll go to the scenario. Then at the end, I'll give you probably 1 minute for the final step. So sit up straight, close your beautiful eyes, and breathe calmly. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know This is a wonderful moment. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Imagine a spring flowing from a granite rock. You see its pure water sparkle in the sun, and you hear its splashes in the surrounding silence. This is a special place where everything is clear, pure, more essential. And now start drinking the water and feel its beneficent energy pervading you and making you feel lighter. Now walk into the spring itself, letting the water flow over you. Imagine that it has the power of flowing through each one of your body cells and also in between them. Imagine the water flowing through the countless nuances of your feelings and emotions, and through your intellect as well. Feel this water cleansing you of all the psychic debris we inevitably accumulate day after day, all our frustrations, regrets, worries, thoughts of all kinds. Gradually, you experience how the purity of the spring becomes your purity, and its energy becomes your energy. Finally, imagine that you are the spring itself, where all is possible and life is forever new. When you are ready, slowly come back. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8. Is everyone back? That's how it goes. So one final comment, that sometimes the experience works so well that you become the water. And that's a different state of consciousness, which some people call shape-shifting. So maybe someone here was that lucky. Thank you.